That's sad.
Look, we got rid of Ryan.
I think he's the only president in my life that does what he says he was gonna do
Well-
when he was running.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Institute on the Constitution. Don't be disappointed. I'm not Michael Anthony Perutka, and I'm not Pastor David Whitney either, but you won't be disappointed tonight with our guest speaker. I'm David Zwald. I'm a graduate of the Institute here, and it's a great group of folks. We've got Neil and Joe and Rob and Hannah and Teresa are all here tonight, so it carries on even without our fearless leader, who I understand is in Fargo, North Carolina, and he's speaking at a homeschooling conference this week. It's pretty good stuff. So it's my honor to try to keep our proceedings going tonight. If you're watching online, it's a cold, wet night here in Maryland, so we have a faithful troop here in the audience. And I'm supposed to tell you that if you need to use the bathroom, just see Teresa, and we'll send you down the hallway for that. But, and I have a few announcements, but if you'll join me, we always open our meetings with prayer, okay? Heavenly Father, we pause this time together, and we acknowledge that you are with us in our heart, in our spirits, and we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who bled and died and paid for our sins, that we might live again and live with you and have an eternal relationship with you. Father, through your hand, this nation was established, and we are grateful for that. Father, if you'll show us through these activities how to maintain these precious liberties that come only from your hand. And we pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. I would like to announce that the next course that the Institute is planning is a Constitution class of the state of Maryland. The Maryland Constitution class should be very, very interesting. I think we've got a book right up here. This is the Maryland Constitution. Notice how thick it is. And do you think our elected representatives know it well? Yeah, probably not. So it's probably a good idea for we, the citizens of Maryland, to get to know this. This class will start here on Friday, March 15th, and will be running every other Friday. Registration is $10 per class or $50 for the student manual, and what is this, free classes here?
Buy the student manual, you can come to all the classes.
Oh, yeah. So if you buy the student manual for $50, then all the classes are free. Or if you can just make it casually, then it's $10 per class. All right, and Teresa at the store has got more information for you on that. Okay, and we do want to thank our sponsor, which is a company known as WIC Accessibility. There's the ad right there for them. They do automatic door activations, and now we have a couple of trailers that we want to show you. about Richard Rothschild. By the way, Richard, looks like you were having a good time up there for a little while, but I have a feeling maybe not so much fun. But Commissioner Richard Rothschild was reelected to his second term in Carroll County in 2014 with 73% of the popular vote. He ran under the mantra of less government and describes himself as a Christian constitutional conservative. Richard received nationwide recognition for his leadership in these epic political issues of the 21st century. He's appeared in the Examiner, Baltimore Sun, ABC News. He's been a guest speaker on radio shows throughout America, and he's made several television appearances in defense of private property rights. He was the first elected official in America to terminate a government's membership in Agenda 21. He was the first official in Maryland to create a nullification resolution to thwart unconstitutional gun laws, declaring Carroll County to be the nation's Second Amendment sanctuary county. Well, I like that. Sanctuary and Second Amendment together. That sounds good. I want to hear more about that. Richard is vocal about the role of God in government. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering, an MBA in management and marketing, and he has 30 years of private sector business and real estate experience. And he tells me he's getting retired now, or fully retired, or almost retired. Trying to. Well, let's give him a warm welcome.
It's an honor to be here with all of you at the Institute on the Constitution. I want to start by acknowledging Michael Peruka and Pastor David Whitney and all of the guidance they have provided to our local citizens, our counties, our state. I can tell you this, that I probably wouldn't be half as knowledgeable as I am if not for their astute guidance, and we all owe a debt of gratitude to both of them, so I want to give them a hand right now. So why did they do this to us? And I'm well known across the state of Maryland for saying because we let them. Because we let them. And we have some interesting problems, but you know, we have a small group here tonight, and rather than turning this into a lecture, I'd hope it'll take on more of the persona of a fireside chat with all of you. And let's try to have a little bit of fun. You know, we can make this a downer. I have some video clips that I hope will make it an upper for you and make you want to stand up and cheer, because we do have some victories, but the liberal media makes it a point to try to suppress those victories, and really makes it a point to try to destroy those of us that are achieving those victories in an effort to discredit us. And when it comes to fighting the battles the epic battles of our time, the problem we're dealing with across the country with the left is, as Ronald Reagan said, what they know just isn't so. And it's a real problem for us. So I'm going to be relaxed tonight with this. I'm going to give you plenty of chance to interrupt, talk, ask questions, make comments. I think that'll make this more interesting. I deliberately underfilled this next hour and a half to leave a lot of time for audience interaction, because quite frankly, I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 things, but I've got a list of another dozen things that I could talk about, and all of them are just fascinating. I mean, imagine if you could be on the fly on the wall and see what really goes on in the gears of government, as I have, see what goes on in executive sessions, see all the exchanges that were suppressed and were not shared with you by the media, that is determined to protect Republicans that act like Democrats, and determined to discredit Republicans that would be well respected by our founding fathers for where they stand. So I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to talk about some of the problems, but also I have 3 videos for you this afternoon, or this evening rather, that are really intriguing videos, and I want to give you a chance to see what it looks like to fight back. You know, it's easy to say to an elected official, you need to fight, but they don't know what that means. It'd be like taking someone that's never seen a clarinet and say, play music. They don't know what it means. I've talked to legislators that say, well, Rich, what do you want us to do? We voted and we lost the vote. Well, I used to be a sales and marketing manager, and we used to have a saying to our salespeople. We said, the reason we pay you the big bucks is because your job begins after the customer says no. And as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to politics, our job begins after we lose the vote, because that's the point where we need to try to amend, discredit, derail, nullify, interpose, and in every other way scuttle legislation that's harmful to us. And I want to share an interesting comment with you. I'll touch on it briefly in one of the videos. Welcome, by the way. One of the problems we have across America, it's profoundly serious, is that we have thousands of candidates winning elections, walking up to a judge to be sworn in and raising their right hand and swearing to uphold the Constitution of the United States. Yet, after they take that oath, several interesting questions come up. Number one, do they even know what they took an oath to do? And number two, if they're going to take an oath to the Constitution, doesn't that imply or suggest that they have some level of judgment and intervention they're supposed to impute into their jobs when something goes wrong? And I always hear people say, well, the counties are nothing more than stepchildren of the state. You can only do what you're empowered to do. And my position is, well, I was a commissioner while O'Malley was governor and while Obama was president. I said, well, if I'm only going to do what Obama and O'Malley tell me to do, then why didn't I just take an oath to them? It raised a very profound question. Is a lower magistrate, a lowly county commissioner, a lower magistrate, are we nothing more than administrative hatchet men for the president and the governor? Or do we have an affirmative duty to uphold our oath? And what does it mean to uphold your oath? So my position is, when I took my oath to uphold my oath to the Constitution, my position is this: it instilled upon me an affirmative duty to do something. I remember in graduate school, what do you do if you take over factories to lose the money? Well, the answer is do something. Now, it may not be effective, but I tell you this. Elected officials across America have taken the following position. Any law that passes, they're going to uphold, because until the Supreme Court renders an opinion, there's nothing they can do. I absolutely reject that notion. And I've gone to the Maryland Association of Counties and I've raised the question. I said, well, so if tomorrow you get an edict from the White House or from the governor's office that says round up everybody with green skin and put them in boxcars and ship them off the camps, you going to do it? And you'd be surprised to watch officials squirm when they're asked that question. About a third of them will say, well, I have no choice until the Supreme Court renders an opinion. About another third of them say, well, gee, I don't know what I'd do. I'd have to think about that. And about another third will say, well, no, I don't think I would do that. I think I would refuse. Well, applaud. Hooray, you got it right. So clearly, when you take an oath of office, it suggests that you have an affirmative duty to take action when upper magistrates try to take away the rights of our constituents. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
So I'm sharing this with you to let you know some of the thought processes that I've had to think about profoundly in the course of my holding office. And I've told my wife on several occasions, I'm going to take some very aggressive action if they arrest me. Here are the lawyers to call to get me out of jail. And my wife, Joni, by the way, my wife, Joni's over there. Joni, stand up for a second. Say hi. Joni. My wife has been an endless fountain of support for me. I love her dearly, and quite frankly, this has been probably more stressful on her than me. I've been under constant attack, and I kind of look at it as a badge of honor, but it's hurtful to see your spouse attacked in the media and papers and the dirty tricks they use against you, but so be it. Okay, so with that, setting the stage for what we're going to talk about. Again, I want this to be more conversational and fireside, less of a lecture. Let's have some fun, and let's go through a few things, talk about some questions, but then talk about some of the good things that have come out of it, okay? Sound good? All right. So I've entitled this this slide, because we let them, which is a phrase I've been very well known for across the state. Why do they do this to us? Because we let them, right? Why do we let them? Because, well, nothing we can do. They told us to. The governor told us, the president told us. Well, my head is the hell with that. No, we're not going to let them. And I want to show you what fighting back looks like when you fight back. And I like to say that there's fighting with a small f and fighting with a big F. When you fight with a big F, you put your whole heart and soul in it. You use every tactical trick in the book to try to gain a political advantage and to discredit your opponents. And you put up real resistance rather than superficial resistance. But I've learned in the course of having the honor to serve with some very strong elected officials like Michael Peruka, Commissioner Robin Frazier, that the ones that stand up are the ones that have very deep convictions to God, to Him, and to the Constitution. Because the only way a Republican is not going to disappoint you is if he holds himself accountable to God and the Constitution. Because those Republicans that are concerned about what the liberal media will say have basically ceded their autonomy over to the liberal media. If my only job is to be a chimpanzee and make the liberal media happy, I'm going to behave like a liberal. And that's the problem. So we need more people in office that have conservative convictions. Why does the left keep gaining ground? It's one thing we'll talk about. I'm going to talk about some areas of recent betrayal from politicians from both sides of the aisle, because both of them take an oath to uphold our Constitution, right? I'm going to show you what resistance looks like with 3 short videos, and we're going to talk a little bit about the GOP. A little bit about the GOP, its strengths and its weaknesses. So why does the left gain ground? Well, one of the reasons why they're very brave in Maryland. They do whatever they want. They don't worry about the Constitution. Oh, we're gonna bar and confiscate H-bar AR-15s this legislative session. Well, wait a minute, that would be a taking. Oh, I don't care about that. We don't care. They're brave. They don't. They're insouciant. They have no respect for the Constitution except when it helps them achieve their ends. Conservatives, unfortunately, are not brave. I'm going to say it again. I'm a conservative. They're not brave. They're worried about how they're going to look in the media. And it seems like one of the pathologies that has infected too many conservatives in America today is they talk like conservatives at the bully pulpit when they're running for office. And then once they get into office, they take the support of Republican voters and conservative voters and Christian voters and constitutional voters and libertarian voters for granted, and they spend their time pandering to who? Right, the liberal media. Empowering yourself means you have to have a mindset that you have to believe you can win. You can't walk into it with the attitude, we're outnumbered, so we're going to lose the vote, so why bother to try? And I have this little cartoon. I got this 30 or 40 years ago when I worked at Westinghouse. And basically it depicts a salesman. He's got a machine gun. He's trying to sell it to some medieval warriors that are using, javelins and horses. And their position is, we don't have time for any of these bright ideas. We got a battle on our hands. Don't waste your time telling us about the Constitution, Commissioner. Don't tell us about how we're going to interpose. Don't tell us how we're going to nullify. We got to go out there and take that vote. But what are you going to do after you lose the vote? You better have the constitutional and metaphorical equivalent of a machine gun if you want to fight back. Metaphorical. We're not killing anybody. Let's talk about some areas of recent betrayal. This will be depressing, but you need to know it because, you see, our elected officials of both parties are not talking about these things, and they're very real because even though I've only been out of office for 3 months, I know exactly what's going on down in Annapolis. First off, we have income taxes. How many of you itemized on your state return last year? Right? You probably took deductions of anywhere from $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 by the time you added your state tax, your local tax, your property tax together. I had deductions of something like $20,000 last year. Well, guess what? Kiss the deductions goodbye. Because under the new federal tax code, the standard deduction is $24,000. Under Maryland tax code, you cannot itemize unless you itemized on your federal return. So most of us that don't have $24,000 in deductions will in fact take the standard deduction at the federal level, which means we will be barred from itemizing at the state level. Which means for the average person, you're probably going to lose $10,000 to $15,000 of tax deductions in Maryland, which means you're going to pay tax on $10,000 to $15,000 of additional income. And I told a couple delegates and senators who were talking about this great compromise where they raised the standard deduction a few $100s. I said, no, senator, no delegate. When you give up $20,000 in itemized deductions and you negotiate a $500 increase in the standard deduction, that's not a great compromise. We have another term for that. We call it a sellout. And nobody's talking about it. The Republicans aren't talking about it, and the Democrats are not talking about it. But I tell you what they all do. They're all spending the money, and they're shoveling the money by the trough into the hands of the teachers union, the single most powerful voting bloc in the state, probably the country. So that's going on. So your taxes are going up. Property taxes are going up in Maryland. I bet you didn't know that, did you? How many knew your property taxes are going? I'm not talking about increases in value. I'm talking about increases in the assessment rubric. Okay, what did they do? Well, it was closed, secretive government at its best. You know, we have all these laws that require sunshine and open meetings. I learned from talking to the highest levels, and I'm going to leave all names out of this presentation tonight. I'll talk to you privately. That at the highest levels of our agencies in Annapolis, they made a decision that was unknown to the voters, unknown to elected officials, unknown to county officials, to change the way they assess all real estate in Maryland this year. And instead of assessing properties at approximately 91 or 92% of fair market value, which is where we were 5 years ago, they're now assessing them at 95 to 98% of fair market value. So even if your property didn't go up in value, you're going to see roughly a 5% plus or minus increase in your assessment. That was a tax increase. I want to make it very clear that I consider that an unethical use of government. I think it violated sunshine laws. And quite frankly, I haven't decided what I'm going to do about it yet, but I'm very annoyed over it. And who's talking about it? Nobody. Why not? Because they're spending the money, giving it to special interests to do what? Get themselves reelected. Red flag gun bills. Well, we all know about those, so I won't dwell on them other than to say, here we are. We have red flag gun bills supported by some Republicans, signed by our governor, that basically deny a citizen due process. If one of your family members is antagonistic toward you, they go into a court, they claim that you're unstable, that you're a threat to others. The court issues a confiscation order. The state police knock on your door at 5 o'clock in the morning. They confiscate your firearms, and you are in the unfortunate position of being guilty until proven innocent. And I sent a letter to certain officials in the state about that, warning that someone would be killed if that's the way they're going to do it. And they signed, the bill was signed anyway, and it wasn't 6 months later, we had a 62-year-old Anne Arundel County man died when he answered his door at 5 o'clock in the morning with a firearm in his hand, and a scuffle ensued, and of course he was shot and killed. We could thank both parties for that. County planning. Across the state, there were huge pressures to socially re-engineer communities. Socially re-engineer communities for two reasons. One, because the school system is full on board with the idea that it's government's duty to socially re-engineer your community to assure that it meets the appropriate complexion of their choice, both financially and demographically. And the teachers' unions want more and more roofs and more bodies because they get subsidies for every student that enrolls in the public school. And more subsidies from the state mean more dollars for raises. Who's pandering to the teachers' union? Are the Democrats pandering to the teachers' union? Absolutely. Are the Republicans pandering to the teachers' union? Absolutely. Are the public schools in Maryland turning out Republican or conservative voters? No, they're turning out liberal voters. So I made a comment the other day. I said the Republicans in this state bragging about shoveling more money to the public schools would be equivalent to Karl Marx bragging that he's funding Hillsdale College. Yet they're doing it. Why? We are educating ourselves out of existence. Because I take to talk to the children in my county all the time. Most of them are culturally Marxist by the time they leave the county at 12th grade. Central committees. I actually feel a little bit better now than I did when I created this presentation a month ago. I was just elected to the Central Committee of my county, and the first thing I said is, I want to know what a Republican is. Because there's a bylaw that says we have to support Republican candidates. It makes sense because we're a Republican Central Committee. But I asked a question that many people thought was rhetorical. I said, I want to know what a Republican is. I said, if Bernie Sanders moves into Carroll County tomorrow and registers as a Republican, does that mean I have to support him for re-election? I mean, this was profound because there were people that hadn't thought about it. And I said to them, they said, what do you suggest, Commissioner? I said, I'll tell you what I suggest. I want to vet all candidates. We shouldn't be endorsing any candidates unless they're willing to uphold the RNC platform. Now, question for all of you. How many of you read the RNC platform? Anybody else? 2, 3? It's a good platform, isn't it? That's exactly right. Joe said in the back. It's a great platform. The RNC platform is what all of us believe in. I'll get into that in more detail later. But they're not following it. The problem isn't what the Republican Party stands for. The problem isn't the RNC stated platform. It's a great one. The problem is we're letting people run for office that are completely disregarding the RNC platform and governing in a way that's completely contrary and antithetical to the RNC platform. Make sense? Okay. So how do they get away with all this crazy stuff? Well, I'll tell you why they get away with it, because they don't tell us. And the media doesn't tell us, because as long as government is growing and taxes are going up and unions are getting more powerful and gun rights are being taken away and property rights are being abridged and children are being turned into cultural Marxists, the liberal media is happy. Okay. So in light of all this, I got to get to something positive. What does effective resistance look like? What should Republicans be doing? And I apologize, I have 3 videos that feature me. I'll be honest with you, I really couldn't find videos of anybody else. I'm sure there are. I mean, I can think of some good congressmen, like Congressman Steve King, who's a fighter. We have, Rand Paul tries to fight back. We got a few of them. So when O'Malley, let me give you some background for this. So when O'Malley tried to pass the 2013 firearms law, he wanted to do everything. We're talking about confiscating firearms. They're talking about outlawing magazines that were to more than 10 rounds. They were talking about banning certain weapons. They even wanted to ban, they would even ban single action, bolt rifles, bolt action rifles, single shot rifles if they looked like an assault weapon. It was ridiculous. I mean, that's because the goonballs that were voting on this knew about as much about firearms as most of us know about rocket science. I mean, it was ridiculous. So when I realized they were going to pass it, and I went to a meeting where our delegates and senators said, well, sorry, there's nothing we can do. We lost the vote. I just got particularly angry, and I said to myself, yeah, there's something we can do. So I want to show you what we did. So I'm going to play a video in a second, and what we did in this 7-minute video is, this is just the introductory speech. I'm going to tell you what it led to. After I gave this speech you're about to see, we read out a 5-page resolution. It was a nullification resolution where I convinced the commissioners with great resistance to interpose. And the position we took with O'Malley's gun bill was we can't undo the law, but by golly gee, you can't force me to enforce it. And what I did with this bill, with this resolution, is I prohibited the use of any county resources to enforce the state bill. I prohibited the enforcement of the bill. And I declared Carroll County to be America's first Second Amendment sanctuary county. I did as much as I could, okay? So I want to let you see what real resistance looks like. And this was one of the times where I said to my wife, get ready to have me bailed out of jail, the state, because I know at least one senator wanted to have me arrested 5 years ago when I did this. Are you ready? This is fun.
This is my boss behind me here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? I'm Commissioner Richard Rothschild. I want to thank you for coming. I want to start by reading a portion of a letter I received today from Afghanistan, from a Carroll County citizen. It said, Dear Mr. Rothschild, I applaud you for standing with supporters of the United States Constitution and hosting the forum tonight regarding the Second Amendment. County lawmakers and sheriffs have always been the last line of defense for the ordinary citizen from a government run amok. As I write, I'm on my 16th month in Afghanistan supporting our military in one of the harshest environments on the planet. However, I watch the news with amazement as I see our constitutional rights eroding in one of the harshest political environments our country has ever experienced. Although I will spend this day thousands of miles away from Carroll County, please know that this is one Marylander that supports your efforts in defense of our Second Amendment. Regards, Michael from Eldersburg, currently in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, if we have soldiers and civilians overseas fighting for our liberties, we have to remain diligent here domestically also, because there are threats on both fronts. The challenge facing our citizens and being tackled tonight by the Board of Commissioners is very, very difficult to address. Tonight we are not here to defend guns. We are here to defend freedom. What should we do? Do we wait? Do we simply hope? I believe doing nothing is no longer an option. In fact, I would argue that doing nothing will be interpreted by those that wish to take our rights as acquiescence. The purpose of government is to protect our unalienable rights of life, liberty, and property given to us by God and is guaranteed in the United States Constitution. Now, some citizens mistakenly assume that their right to keep and bear arms comes from the Second Amendment, but that is incorrect. The right to keep and bear arms is assumed to be a natural right from God, and the Second Amendment is merely a restriction on government. It says to government, stay away. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Alexander Hamilton said, quote, "The Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms." Now, some people will argue government can infringe because the state does have reasonable powers of regulation. They say, even the right to free speech does not give you the rights to yell fire in a crowded movie theater. But they are wrong. The First Amendment does give you the right to yell fire in a crowded movie theater, but you will go to jail for abuse of that right. Trying to extend this metaphor to the Second Amendment is flawed. The current attacks on the Second Amendment are the equivalent of putting masking tape on the mouths of law-abiding citizens before they enter the movie theater. Proponents of unconstitutional infringement claim they want to protect us, and they have good intentions, but their intentions are no excuse. Daniel Webster said, quote, "Good intentions will always be pleaded for every assumption of authority. It is hardly too strong to say the Constitution was made to guard the people against the dangers of good intentions. There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be good masters, but they mean to be masters nonetheless." Patrick Henry said, quote, "The Constitution is not an instrument for the government to restrain the people. It is an instrument for the people to restrain the government." Another interesting politician stated, quote, "As long as the government is perceived as working for the benefit of the children, the people will happily endure almost any curtailment of liberty and almost any deprivation." And that was Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf. So why are we here? Maryland's former Attorney General wrote a 63-page proposal on steps to eliminate handgun ownership rights in Maryland. Now the latest gun ban outlaws 45 guns under the guise of protecting the public safety. The poster child gun for the current ban was arguably the AR-15, semi-automatic rifle, that was banned under the excuse of protecting the public safety. But there's a problem. There were 0 shootings in Maryland last year with AR-15s. So if the Maryland Firearms Safety Act can use public safety as a rubric to ban a gun that wasn't used in any crimes, imagine how easy it will be for them to use the same exact excuse next year to start banning guns that were actually used in crimes. The Constitution will not enforce itself. I want to say that again. It will not enforce itself. And clearly we have federal and state officials that are determined to pervert the role of government and do that which is prohibited. Folks, we can no longer live in a world of pretend and deny. The fact is the United States Constitution is under attack. Why do they do this? Well, because we let them. And in our efforts to be reasonable, we have proven we will tolerate intolerable infringements on our freedoms. And this has emboldened them to use hyper-democratic processes to take away rights. But we are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. And in a constitutional republic, the majority has no authority to take away rights from the minority. And I'll tell you something else. There's no cavalry that's going to ride over the hill and save us. So clearly, local citizens and local elected officials have become our last line of defense against those who would steal our freedoms. Opponents suggest we have no power except that which Annapolis gives to us because counties are a creation of the state. I reject this line of reasoning. We are not appointed hatchet men or women for the state of Maryland. Because in America, no government is sovereign. It is we, the people, that retain all power. And as elected officials, we derive our powers from the consent of the governed, and that is you. You elected us, and we've heard you loud and clear, and that is why this Board of Commissioners is here tonight with our state's attorney, our sheriff, and other honored guests to talk about what we're going to do. So what do we do? Well, I find it interesting that some Maryland counties have declared themselves to be sanctuary counties for illegal immigration. It seems to me that we should be able to do something similar for a constitutional purpose. So tonight we have prepared a Second Amendment preservation resolution. It will declare Carroll to be a Second Amendment sanctuary county. The three branches of your county government are here tonight sharing common concerns. Your commissioners, your sheriff, and your state's attorney are determined to work together to use their individual and appropriate levels of discretion to uphold the Constitution. It is our goal to help protect you from blind prosecution under a law that seeks to criminalize you simply for exercising rights already protected by the Second Amendment. Thank you very much.
What do you think? 2013, May of 2013. So what happened after that? Win or lose? I think we had a partial win. The sheriff made it clear that he would use the highest level of discretion in applying the law. He had to stop short of saying he wouldn't enforce it because it opened him up to possible prosecution. The state's attorney said he would only prosecute under the law under exigent circumstances. For example, where somebody had a prior criminal record. But let's talk about what didn't happen from my Republican colleagues around the state. Two other counties passed a watered-down version of this, but the other 14 or so Republican counties did nothing. What would have happened if 16 or 17 counties had all adopted this exact same resolution? What would have happened? You had 17 counties saying we're not going to enforce the state law. Think we could have stopped it?
Strengthen numbers.
Strengthen numbers, well said. And ironically, as we hear today, I think Illinois now has either 17 or 19 counties that have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries.
Oh, really?
Yep. I don't know how many times this has been adopted across the country, but I believe it's well over 100 now, I believe. And here we are 5 years later, and this is still being copied across the United States.
And you were the initial?
I was the first elected official to write one of these. Yes, I was. But the point is this: we could have won this. If there's 3,000. I think there's 3,100 counties approximately in America, and over 2,000 of them are Republican, and more than 2,000 of them, I believe, support the Second Amendment. Why didn't every county in America start adopting these things? We could have put an end to this.
So Richard, was
Yes,
this a
Dave.
resolution, or
Was there-
was this was a resolution that was, and was it voted in favor by all the commissioners?
Well, that's
Give
an
us a
interesting,
little more of the-
yeah. So let's talk about the dynamics of how it came. There was a resolution, first of all. I made a decision not to make it an ordinance or a law. I was concerned that if I made it an ordinance or a law, that Annapolis would come down and say, we have clear precedents with respect to gun laws, that the state's laws would trump the county's laws. And I didn't want to give them something they could take into court and nullify. And I decided that making it a resolution would be a better way to do it, because they really have no way of undoing a resolution. And what the resolution basically said was, no, we're not going to enforce these elements of the Firearms Safety Act. We're not going to criminalize people that already have pre-existing firearms. We're not going to criminalize people for having high-capacity magazines. We're not going to go around and turning this into a circus. We're not going to do it. So it was an ordinance. Now let's talk about the dynamics. There are 5 commissioners on my Board of Commissioners today, and there were in 2013. So when I first came up with this idea, Commissioner Robin Frazier immediately jumped on it and said, great, we need to do this, Rich. She's a strong Christian conservative. A third commissioner said, yeah, I support this. A fourth commissioner objected. He told me that, he said, there's no such thing as a nullification resolution. But if you call it anything but that, I will consider voting for it. So I called it a Second Amendment preservation resolution rather than a Firearms Safety Act nullification resolution. And then the fifth commissioner was an interesting one. I'm not using any names tonight. I'm not out to make personal attacks here tonight. I'm out to show you some of the pathology in our own party, though. He pretended to support it, but every time I turned around, including up until 5 p.m. the day we adopted this, he was trying to derail it. In fact, at around 5 p.m. the day that we unanimously passed this, the state's attorney came into my office and said he just talked to my fellow commissioner and he wasn't going to vote for this now, the state's attorney. And I needed the state's attorney, right? Because to truly nullify something, not only do I have to say we're going to prohibit the use of county resources, but the sheriff's got to say, yep, we're not going to enforce, and the state's attorney has to say, yeah, we ain't going to prosecute. I needed them. Luckily, after half an hour of a very heated discussion with the state's attorney, he reversed himself again. He says, all right, Rich, I'll do it. And I had to, and I dragged him into the hearing room where there were 230 people in that room, and he took a position in favor of it. This was epic. And of course, the left was, calling me names, wingnut, all that kind of crazy names, saying, oh, you did nothing, it was nothing but symbolic. And my position was, wait a minute, if my sheriff won't arrest and my state's attorney won't prosecute, it's clearly more than symbolic. One of the state senators was calling for my arrest and prosecution for violating the law. Michael Peruka came out and called for her arrest for violating the Constitution. So we had a partial win, but the real point about this in terms of how do we fight back, this is an example of how we fight back. This sent shockwaves across the state and across the country. Because they knew, and I knew, that if another few dozen counties across the region had adopted this, we could have basically shut the whole law down. But we don't have enough, I hate to say this, and I have to say, I've never considered myself to be a particularly brave man. I know I go into traffic court and I'm shaking sometimes when I talk to the judge. But I got to tell you, we've got some real cowards in office. They just don't want to do anything. They want to play it safe. And I don't understand why people run for office and give these bellicose speeches and if they're afraid to lead. I mean, leadership doesn't mean following the easy way. It means when the crowd is going to the left, you've got to go to the right. So anyway, we won. I mean, we had a partial win, and more importantly, it's still alive across the United States today. And ironically, 5 years later, this resolution is still on the front page of our county website. So the message is we can still win rounds, but it takes Republicans are willing to put themselves out there and fight hard and go out on a limb the way you saw this fellow did here on the video. It was a scary time for us, wasn't it, Joni? We really thought I might get arrested. I know the next few days I think I wore tennis shoes to the county office building so that if they took me off to jail, I wouldn't be wearing good clothes.
I just want to tell the audience that we've got this microphone. If you want to ask a question for our listeners, just we'll pass the microphone around. That's all I want to say.
So before I move on, any questions about the Second Amendment Preservation Resolution or any of the dynamics behind it? Ultimately, by the way, the Republicans that were trying to scuttle it voted for it because they knew to vote against it would be political suicide. But I'll make it clear, they didn't vote for it because they agreed with it. They voted for it as a protective matter to protect themselves from being destroyed in the next election. Any questions? Okay, comments? Okay, let's go to the next one. In Maryland, we spend $14 billion of your tax money every 5 years to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. $14 billion. And they're blaming farmers, the experts, all the experts. And I have a saying about experts, especially in the environmental community. I have a very strong and powerful statement about experts when it comes to environmental issues. You ready? Remember this, Rises, you can steal it from me. Most experts aren't. Most experts aren't. So I'm in the office, and in my own account, spending $10 million a year trying to comply with these environmental mandates to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. We're spending millions of dollars to put these sand traps in for stormwater drainage, and I'm looking at the numbers, and being a former engineer, I can actually do the math in my head. I'm saying, this is ridiculous. We're spending $2,000 to take out 1 pound of nitrogen. I mean, a single stray cat puts out 3 pounds of nitrogen a year in its feces. In fact, I got to tell you a funny story about that. I was down at the Joint Administrative Legislative Committee, whatever it's called, in Annapolis, testifying on the House floor, and I told them about how this is ridiculous. We'll spend this much money. I said it'd be cheaper to round up stray cats and put them in a Hyatt Regency than for us to spend tens of millions of dollars putting in these stormwater management systems. Let's round up the cats. I said, here's the calculation. You round up every cat in Baltimore City, it's 500 to 1,000 pounds of nitrogen a year. They wanted us to put in these BAT septic systems, best available technology septic systems. A BAT septic system costs $10,000 more than a conventional and took out 10 pounds of nitrogen a year. So what I said to the committee, I said, so it really boils down to one thing. If you're really serious about cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, forget the bats, as in the bat subject. Forget the bats, get the cats. And for the next month or two, every time I saw some in Annapolis, they was, hey, that was funny, Rich. We like that. Forget the bats, get the cats. Anyway, So going back to this, I was on Comcast Newsmaker, and I said, what we're doing with cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, it'd be the metaphorical equivalent, and actually statistically the equivalent, of you trying to take, Dave, you try to take pollution out of your swimming pool with an eyedropper while somebody else is putting the pollution back in with a fire hose. So I started studying this problem because the costs were crushing to my county. And I discovered, when I looked at the Conowingo Dam during Tropical Storm Lee, I learned that in one tropical storm, the same amount of pollution that I was going to take out of the Chesapeake Bay over 5 years of stormwater abatement, 5 years for $50 million, the same amount of pollution I could remove for $50 million over 5 years was the exact same amount of pollution that flowed through the Conowingo Dam during a tropical storm in how long? 35 seconds. 35 seconds. And I went down to the Senate and I testified, and I got into a contest with Senator Joan Carter Conway, and well, Commissioner, you just don't care about the bay. I said, no, Senator, we're not debating whether or not we should clean up the bay. The question isn't what the question is, whether to do it or not. The question is, how do we do it? Because this is insane. We're going to run out of money before we run out of pollution. So ultimately, realizing that the Conowingo Dam was really the epicenter of the pollution of the dam, I went public. None of my fellow commissioners would stand with me at the time. None of them would stand with me. And I'm going to show you just 2 minutes of a 6-minute video where I proved once and for all that the federal government was photoshopping photos of the pollution plume coming out of the dam for purposes of being able to blame our farmers for the runoff from their fields. You ready to see this? 2 minutes long. All right, here we go. Oh, it's more. I used some soft language, but really it was fraud, and we demanded the organization I helped put together called the Clean Chesapeake Coalition. We demanded the Inspector General to look into this, but it was under the Obama administration, and of course, lying and deception was the norm at that point in time.
Does this affect you? Well, yes. Maryland will spend $14 billion cleaning up the bay, or about $10,000 for every Carroll County family. And it's being used as an excuse to force environmental mandates upon us, including the phosphorus management tool, bat septics, and the rain tax. And these unaffordable mandates hurt our business and our ability to fund critical services. The concern, 2 issues arise. Are federal agencies manipulating reports, and if so, how are they being used to harm us? Fasten your seatbelts. On the left is a 2012 satellite photo of the bay, clearly showing a devastating yellow pollution plume originating at the Conowingo Dam. This settlement plume settles to the bottom and kills oysters, the bay's natural filtration system. On the right is a similar photo in the 2015 USGS report that blames farmers for bay problems. But there's a problem. It's the exact same photograph. You can tell that by comparing the cloud formations in white. The government, the federal agency, photoshopped the brownish pollution plume out of the photo on the right because it detracted from their agenda of blaming our farmers.
Bet you didn't know that. Why wasn't that all over the media? We had the smoking gun. We had the proof. I have to tell you, if there's one organization that's failing us, it's the media. In fact, the media was very prolific in publishing letters attacking me, again, for tilting at windmills. They made fun of me. They belittled me. I had some group of 25 scientists said, we all agree Richard Rothschild is crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And here we are today, 3 years later. Governor Hogan has appointed the Clean Chesapeake Coalition, the organization I helped found, as its advisory group, and the EPA, Federal Environmental Protection Agency, and the state have declared the Conowingo Dam to be its own watershed now for purposes of controlling pollution runoff of sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus, okay? All the scientists in the state were against us at the time. Every environmental scientist in the state was against us. Most experts aren't. See, they have another agenda. They want to use clean water as an excuse for land use restrictions and attacks on our 5th and 14th Amendment property rights. Joni?
Explain to the people they might not know about the problem with the Conowingo, how the sediment has gone. The Conowingo Dam,
Closer.
the The Conowingo Dam has been in existence for many, many years. And the sediment that comes down from the Susquehanna River in New York, New Jersey, whatever, has built up and built up and built up. And no one's cleaned it out behind that. So every time we have a heavy rain, or any kind of heavy rain, it just shoves all this silt over the edge. And this has been going, the dam, that problem has been going on for 80 years. So Richard, pointed this out to people. People aren't realizing it, but as all that silt comes down, it smothers all the oysters and clams and everything, and the plant life that is a natural cleaning of the bay. So they're
Thank you,
finally
Joan.
going to do.
I have something.
Sure.
I read years ago that the Conowingo Dam is filled with about 80% of sludge. Is that true?
The question was, is the Conowingo Dam full, about 80% full with sludge? Absolutely, it's true. When the Conowingo was built, it was approximately 110 feet deep, and the last number I saw said that the depth of the water 50 feet out from the dam was only something like 19 feet. It's now completely filled with sludge, and this sludge is heavily contaminated with nitrogen and phosphorus. And ironically, the scientists at the Maryland Department of the Environment and the EPA were blaming it on the nitrogen and phosphorus loads, and nitrogen and phosphorus loads, and nitrogen and phosphorus loads, but there was a different problem. The sediment, the amount of sediment was an order of magnitude greater than the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus, hundreds of millions of pounds, I mean tens of thousands of tons. So it would build up like a gallbladder, and it would sit there for weeks or months, and then there'd be a tropical storm. You'd have high velocity waters coming towards the dam at 30, 40, 50 miles an hour, and it would create what's called a scouring effect, a sucking effect. And it would suck these tens of thousands of tons of sediment that had built up through the dam locks into the Chesapeake Bay, turning it yellow. You saw the yellow plume. Everybody see the yellow plume? And what happened was, since there was so much so quickly, the bay could not assimilate, and it would settle to the bottom of the bay. And when it settled to the bottom of the bay, it would create a layer of it was equivalent of putting plastic bags over all the submerged aquatic vegetation and the oysters, killing everything. And the bay was being killed every year or two from the bottom up by this sludge. And finally, the evidence we had was just inarguable. And finally, the environmentalists finally caved in, and they admitted that we had in fact discovered the critical element of fixing the bay. And even then, I had to handle this in a way that was very surgical. I met with myself and my group, the Clean Chesapeake Coalition, met with the Maryland Department of the Environment, Secretary Ben Grumbles, and he talked about how all the environmental groups were opposing cleaning it up, because if we just fixed the dam, it would take so much pollution out of the bay that all the other restrictions that we're spending billions of dollars on all around the state would not be necessary. So one quick comment. So the bottom line was this. I said to the secretary, I said, look, Mr. Secretary, when you talk to the environmental groups, don't tell them we're going to do this instead of everything else. Tell them we have to do this to protect the gains we've made elsewhere. And that was the marketing of it, and the environmental groups finally backed off and finally agreed to support us. And here we are today. There is unanimous agreement that the Conowingo Dam's got to be cleaned up. Yes, Dave.
So I think a lot of us, we're all Marylanders here in the room right now. I mean, I think it happened just a little over a year ago, did it not? It overflowed, and we had all of these plumes just recently. And I'm certainly not an expert, but if we think back, we have a public utility with stockholders, right? That's runs the Conowingo Dam.
That's
we
correct.
have Pennsylvania, Delaware, New York, Maryland. Right? We have all these entities, and no one's really taking apparently any responsibility. They've talked for years about dredging it. So what how can you fill in some of these points that I'm floating out there? How do we really get this thing addressed?
Everything you said is true. All of the issues that Dave brought up about the fact we're really inheriting the pollution load from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York had been ignored, and nothing had been done. There had been no federal funding. We actually approached the EPA and asked about Superfund money to try to clean up the dam. That has not been resolved yet. The assumption the environmentalists had made was we were going to dredge the stuff out of the dam and then put it somewhere else. Well, one of the things that got us over the hump and got us moving forward is that we had one particular company that came forward and said, no, we can take that sediment, it's a light aggregate, we can actually make building materials out of it. We can use it to make pavers, countertops, etc. So there is a pilot program underway right now where I think they're going to drill 25,000 tons out, see if it can be used to make building materials. And this is an area where Governor Hogan's been strong. He's been a disappointment some years, but he's been strong here. He's been working with the other states to try to demanding that demanding that they pony up some money to help us do this. But the real point is this: our taxpayers were footing the bill for all of this, and now we're going to start intercepting this before it gets down to the Chesapeake Bay. Yes, Ann.
The Chesapeake Bay Foundation has been created many years ago, and I did fund it for many years and then stopped because I don't know really what they're doing for the Chesapeake Bay. It seems like the government in Maryland has been raiding that fund. So what is the role that they play today?
I'm going to choose my words carefully. It's a private organization. I don't like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I don't support the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation has been on the wrong side of this issue for many years. Now I think they're on the right side of this issue. And I think that many of the initiatives they ask for do not pass what I consider to be a responsible and reasonable cost-benefit analysis. If you're going to support an initiative to remove pollution, then you got to look and say, look, for the amount of money I have, can I take out enough pollution to make a difference? I used to say in Annapolis that a pollution abatement strategy of everything, everywhere, at any price is not a strategy for success, it's a strategy for failure. Any more comments or questions on this issue? Tell you what I'd like to do. I thought we were going to get through the video in the first half, but we didn't. We're actually halfway through it. It's 8 o'clock. Dave, what do you say we take a
Let's take a 10-minute break,
10-minute
15 break.
15-minute break?
Okay.
Come back at 8:15. I'll show you another very interesting video having to do with stopping illegal immigration in Carroll County. I think you'll find it fascinating. And we'll open up the floor for more interactive questions and answers. How does that sound?
Great. Good.
Okay, God bless and thank you. See you in 15 minutes.
When our fathers pledged allegiance, it was not to a flag they saw. They declared our independence by bold reference to God's law. The American view was not so new back in 1773. It has roots that run back to Genesis 1 and all through history. So give me your ear if you care to hear the plan for liberty. It covers the span since time began, and it's true for you and me. A tyrannical king is a terrible thing our fathers had to face, but they declared with the faith they shared, law comes from a higher place. I'm singing the American view, I'm bringing the American view. There is a God, He gave us our rights, He gave us civil government too. I'm playing the American view, I'm praying the American view. Securing rights is what governments do in the genuine American view. There is a God, our rights come from Him. He is the author of the law. He created governments to secure those rights for us all. But when civil government gets all twisted and bent, the people have a duty to do. Abolish it and then rebuild it again in a way that is righteous and true. But how do we know what is righteous and true? Where is the beginning and the end? Is there a standard tried and true on which to depend? I'm had enough of socialist stuff and you wanna start pitching tea. You can throw the bums out, but you better watch out for alternative tyranny. For if the leaders we find are the lesser evil kind, then even if they prevail, they'll betray our cause as they break God's laws, and liberty will fail. America began with humility, acknowledging God's plan. He said, if we seek his face, he will heal our land. I'm singing the American view. I'm bringing the American view. There is a God. He gave us our rights. He gave us civil government too. I'm playing the American view. I'm praying the American view. Historically traced, biblically based, it's the genuine American view. Bringing the American view. Yeah, I'm singing the American view. Bringing the American view. I'm playing the American view. Will you sing the American view? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you, Mr. Congressman? What did you vote for today? Did you do honor to the oath that you swore? Or did you vote to take my rights away? Do you know where government comes from and whom it is you must obey? Will you defend the law of nature's God, no matter what some earthly judge may say? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you, Mr. Councilman? What did you vote for today? Did you do honor to the oath that you swore? Or did you vote to take my land away? Do you have a standard for what's right? Or are you only following the mob? Romans 13 says you're a minister of God. Is that how you see the job? Who you really are, we'll know by what you do. We saw you swear an oath. Now please follow through. Mr. Sheriff, sir, we need you to be true. Will you be who we voted for when we voted for you? Are you prepared to stand in the gap? Are you prepared to interpose? We the people are looking up to you. You're the man we chose. God gave the rule for civil ministry in Exodus 18, 21, 22, 23. More than ever now, Mr. Sheriff, sir, we need you to be true. Will you be who we voted for when we voted for you? Yeah, we voted for you. Now we need you to be true. So just who are you? Who are you? There's a battle going on, a war for your soul. It's a devil's deal, it's mind control. They want you to believe that you have no hope. They're counting on the fact that you are a dope. Well, they tell you the rules, tell you what to eat. They know that you won't question, they know that you don't read. We've lived a lie for way too long. It's time to know right from wrong. No matter what they told you all, courts and judges cannot make law. The case law method has a fatal flaw because courts cannot make law. Courts cannot make law. Courts cannot make law. The case law method has a fatal flaw because courts cannot make law. Congress makes the laws and the courts make none. That's in the Constitution, it's in Article 1. Look it up, read the words, use your own two eyes. Know it well, mark the spot, have it memorized. Tell your children, tell your mama, tell your family. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors if you wanna be free. You won't learn the truth in government schools. It's up to you to know the rules. No matter what they told you all, courts and judges cannot make law. The case law method has a fatal flaw because courts cannot make law. Courts cannot make law. Courts cannot make law. The case law method has a fatal flaw because courts cannot make law. Cannot make law. The case law method has a fatal flaw because courts cannot make law. Courts cannot make law. Courts cannot make law. The case law method has a fatal flaw because courts cannot make law. Oh, Dred Scott was not law, you see. They ignored the court then, and so should we.
Again here, friends. I'm going to wait a minute until he gives me the on-air signal here. Okay, we're ready to start again. We had a good 15-minute break, and Richard, we invite you back up. Thank you for this first hour, fast-moving hour. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and welcome back, everybody. Keep your seatbelts fastened. We're going to go through some more things. But two interesting questions I want to address that came up during the break. One of the questions was, well, what good is the resolution if the state police could come in anyway? We passed it at the county level. The state police can come in and arrest anyway. But think about this. If the county officials execute a resolution that says it's okay to bring your AR-15 with 30-round magazines to the shooting range, and even though it's just a resolution, then the state police were to come in, and they didn't, because most state police are supporters of the Second Amendment. I want to make it clear. Most of them are good people. And the state police were to come in and arrest them under the guise of enforcing the state law. Well, that person would be arrested in Carroll County. They would be in front of a Carroll County Circuit Court. The first thing that person's attorney is going to say is, look, Your Honor, I've got the resolution right here. It says that they're allowed to have these magazines. My client wasn't attempting to break the law. We give them a plausible defense. See, it wasn't a perfect solution, but within the limits of my power, I wanted to do whatever I could to protect my citizens, because that's the people I take an oath to support their constitutional rights. And to the best of my knowledge, no one's ever been prosecuted in Carroll County for this law unless they had a criminal record, to the best of my knowledge. Okay. Second thing I wanted, the question was asked to me about, well, how about all these scientists? Why were the scientists opposing you and this and that? I want to point out, when the government gives out grants, the grants are really not grants in the sense that they're looking for neutral. They have an agenda. You know, and I like to metaphorically say, it'd be kind of like me saying to Ron over here, Ron, I'm going to give you a $10 million grant to tell me whether or not global warming is taking place. And by the way, if it is, there'll be another $10 million grant for you to tell me what's causing it. And by the way, if you can find out what's causing it, there'll be another $10 million to come up with a list of things that we can do, restrictions we can put on our citizens to abate it. And by the way, if you can do that, I'll give you another $10 million to give me the long-term effect of the changes. So what you create is a daisy chain of grants that are designed from the very beginning to corrupt the scientific process. So in the end, when the government says 97% of all scientists say global warming is real, what they mean is the 97% of the scientists that all did research based on government grants all agree it's taking place, because they all know if they don't give the government the answer once, they will never be hired again. Okay? Okay, very good. All right, so with that, I'm going to move on. I lost my wife. You lost your wife.
I know.
It just goes to say, as Rodney Dangerfield would say, I get no respect. Okay. Let's go back to 2014. I think it was July. This is exciting. This was the scariest moment of my life, I think. I get a call at 8 o'clock in the morning from my assistant, Miss Kathy Fuller. It was a Wednesday morning, I think. She says, Commissioner, get in here right away. I said, what's going on, Kathy? She says, the Obama administration's trying to bring illegal aliens into Carroll County and dump them in Westminster at the Army Reserve. I said, what? She said, get in here right now. No commissioners are here. Drove directly to the county office building. She ran out, jumped in my car. I said, take me over let's go over to the Army Reserve. Went to the Army Reserve Center. It had been mothballs for a decade. The lights are on, the doors are open, the gates are open, the floors are washed and waxed. I said, by golly gee, they're getting ready to receive. You know anything about this? So I got on the phone, came back. First thing I did is I called all the commissioners. Called all the commissioners, the other 4 commissioners. All 4 said they'd come in. I called for an emergency cabinet meeting at 1 o'clock with my cabinet. All 4 commissioners said they'd be in at 1. I want you to know that 2 of them, all 4 were Republicans, 2 of them never showed. Okay, I'm not giving you their names, but it's my position they didn't show because they knew I was going to take on the Obama administration. They ran away with their tails between their legs. Go, this is going to be a real screw-up. Wait till this is going to blow up Rothschild's face. Don't go anywhere near him. They didn't show up. One of those people eventually lost office, and he's gone, and the other one is gone into higher level positions within the state government, elected positions, okay? But they both went AWOL when we needed them. And I will tell you in advance, I told my cabinet, I said to my cabinet, I said, here's the deal. If we aren't able to stop them and they bring them here, here's the answer to every question that the federal government asks you is no. They want food services? No. Housing services? No. Health services? No. Translation services? No. Educational services? No. Anything they want, the answer is no, no, no. We're giving them nothing. I am not going to become the dumping ground for Obama's policies. And I found out after the fact that O'Malley had been in collusion with Obama to do this. So I got on the phone, and by the way, I called several senators and congressmen. The only one to really come to my aid was Congressman Andy Harris. He was strong on this. He was very supportive. I want to give Andy Harris, Congressman Harris, credit. He was behind us 100%. So here's how the phone call went. You want to know how it was behind closed doors? You know, they don't train you for this in college. You don't get any government 101s that tells you what to do. So I pick up the phone. I get my secretary to find out who's responsible. I think it was Health and Human Services. My secretary gets a hold of the deputy secretary. So here's how the conversation goes. Madam Secretary, this is Commissioner Richard Rothschild, Carroll County. What's going on? Well, Commissioner, we're going to bring. We've got some refugees from Central America. We're going to bring them up to Carroll County from the Mexico, Texas, Arizona border. Then we're going to keep them there for a couple months. Then we're going to reunite them with their families. I said, Madam Secretary, I don't understand. Why would you do that? If they have families here in America, then just reunite them immediately with their families. It makes no sense to bring them up through Mexico into the United States. They move them 2,500 miles to Maryland, and they move them 2,500 miles back because most of their families probably still in the Southwest United. This doesn't make sense. But I have some other questions for you, Madam Secretary. I said, once they're here, how are you going to prevent them from becoming a problem and disrupting my city, Westminster? Are you going to put barbed wire up around all the fence and keep them locked up in there? Because they're not going to be too happy after a couple of days. And there was silence on the other end. Madam Secretary, are you going to put armed guards outside with M16 rifles and shoot them if they try to escape? There was no answer. I said, Madam Secretary, no disrespect intended, but I have to tell you, I think you're a liar. I think you're a liar. You should have engaged us in intergovernmental coordination. Instead, you blindsided us. Don't even bother. If you have any planes, trains, or automobiles on the way to Carroll County, you better turn them right now, because when you get here, you're going to have a fight on your hands. Ultimately, that triggered a conflict with O'Malley and Obama. O'Malley told Obama that it was the right-wing extremists in Western Maryland. He apologized to Obama. Obama was embarrassed, but guess what? They never came. Chalk one up for the Gipper, for Republicans that stood up. But remember, two of my fellow commissioners who never showed up for that. So let's take a look at the video. So when that happened, I was contacted by Fox News, and this was national Fox News. I'm just going to give you 2 minutes of it, showing what the interview sounded like from Fox News, and the way Republicans should be talking when they're fighting back. It should always have a constitutional basis for our fighting.
You've seen the pictures of feds dumping hundreds of illegal immigrants in shelters in states across the country, but not in Maryland. Why? It might have something to do with my next guest, Carroll County Commissioner Richard Rothschild. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning, Peter. How are you?
So why aren't you allowing the federal government to dump illegal immigrants in Carroll County?
Well, there's a couple issues here, Peter. First and foremost, they blindsided us. You know, they're supposed to engage in something called intergovernmental cooperation, and blindsiding us and trying to dump immigrants into our community without our knowledge is simply not acceptable.
And so how were they blindsiding you, and how did the folks in Carroll County respond to what the federal government was thinking of doing?
Well, the folks in Carroll County were furious over this, and I can safely say 100% of the phone calls we received were against this policy of the federal government.
And so is it the policy of Carroll County that you'll never take any illegal immigrants, even though there's a national crisis? Explain that to me.
Well, my position is this is bad policy. There's nothing humanitarian about dumping hundreds of illegal aliens into an American city and stealing resources that would otherwise be available to handle our veterans, our disabled, our elderly, our disadvantaged people. You know, this is a zero-sum game. In the real world, there's no free lunch. And we are struggling right now to keep up the needs with American disadvantaged people, and we simply don't have the resources to handle additional aliens.
And what's the ultimate solution, Commissioner? If not in Maryland, if not in another state, where do we put these people while they're being processed and while we're determining their fate going forward?
Well, as I said before, the International Red Cross should be dealing with this problem down in southern Mexico. The minute they leave Central America and get into Mexico, at that point, they're no longer refugees from Central America. They now have hosts safe within Mexico, and that's where the aid should be delivered. But the ultimate solution to this problem lies in the United States Constitution. Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution requires the federal government to defend our states from invasion. And not only are they not defending us from invasion, but they are aiding and abetting in the invasion of this. And I want to point out that the Declaration of Independence states that governments are instituted among men deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. Well, I've got news for Washington, D.C. You do not have our consent, and we will resist. We will refuse to use the resources of our local government to provide any assistance. I instructed our cabinet members we will not provide translation services, social services, housing services, food services, you name it. We don't have those resources, and I'm not going to take them from American citizens and Carroll County citizens that are in need of these services to give them to folks that should not be in America at this point in time.
Big win. We stopped them. Big win, we stopped them. But how many other times could we have stopped them if Republican officials had stood up? But I'm not going to lie to you, I was scared, and I didn't know if I would be arrested because I basically was taking on the President of the United States. So some interesting follow-on to this. We did succeed in stopping that, and that resulted in a conflict developing between Obama and O'Malley, and I laughed for months over that as they were going at each other's throats over that. So not only did we win, but we caused a severe conflict between the two of them, and I was loving that. And but it's interesting, the left criticized me, you hateful, hypocritical Christian, you don't care about the little children. And I'll get to you in just a second, Joni. Okay, we'll get to that.
That's what we want you to tell them.
Okay. And ultimately, so the left reposted this video. They reposted it. But it was very interesting because that's what they did. I noticed when they posted it was about 30 or 45 seconds too short. Well, they cut out the section where I said, it's a zero-sum game. We have limited resources. I'm not going to take them from American citizens and give them to aliens. It shouldn't be. They took that out and then posted it back up in an effort to try to make me look like a cold-hearted, rascally Republican. And then I had to manually upload it myself on YouTube and get it back into the public domain. That's the way they act, okay? Well, there's nothing the left won't do. Their God is their own values, and their ethical framework is utilitarian. Their ends justify their means. Question? Kelly?
What about, they were saying about Trump, and like you said, the immigrants. What about when they were going after Trump, and I helped Michael campaign, and when I was at the library, I come a distance, so I went to go in the library, and I was already stopped. They're complaining about, the children, and being in little jails and cages. Obama did that. We did not hear enough about how they were in cages with Obama.
I'll just take that as a comment, not a question. I'll just add one addendum to that before I go to my wife who wants me to talk about something. I want to point out that, number one, they always use the children. Number two, nothing prevents the left from adopting these children, okay?
Right. Yeah.
Take personal responsibility, okay? Adopt them, okay? But don't point to us and say we have to take responsibility or government has to take responsibility. And third, I want to point out that I am extremely disappointed with my party. I want to know why we didn't get the votes to build that wall when we owned both chambers of the Congress.
Right.
Neil?
I'll say so. At any time during the conflict, at any time during the conflict, did O'Malley have a hint of taking your side? He just was against you the whole time?
No, O'Malley, I think O'Malley, I believe, I don't have proof that O'Malley helped engineer it.
Right.
I'm under the impression that O'Malley consented to the Washington, D.C.'s request for this, and said, I'll fix those wascally conservatives out in Western Maryland. We'll give them their worst nightmare. I believe it was premeditated, and I believe it was designed to embarrass us. And I remember sitting at my desk that morning feeling scared and thinking to myself, I got to stop this, because if they can do this, they can do anything to us. It was government tyranny to the nines, if you know what I mean. Joni, you had something you wanted to say?
No, for your next topic, you might want to talk about that prayer lawsuit.
Okay, my wife wants me to talk about the prayer lawsuit. I don't want to make a big deal about this because I have to give all of the credit to him, not the men and women who fight this, but you know, for 50 years, legislative prayer has basically been outlawed. You couldn't say, you know, I used to have a very generic prayer well, we were sued for giving Christian prayers. And I want to tell you what one of my prayers was, because I gave it over and over again, that was described by members of the Democratic Central Committee as a divisive, hateful, sectarian Christian prayer. You ready for it? Divisive, hateful, sectarian prayer. That's how they pleaded it out in the case that went up to the federal district court. Okay, it's getting pretty high up there. Dear Lord, I come to you on behalf of my Board of Commissioners. I ask that you give us guidance and wisdom that we may make good decisions on behalf of the people of Carroll County and spend their money wisely. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. That's what they described as a hateful, divisive prayer. So to make a long story short, praise be to God. Praise be to National Center for Life and Liberty, David Gibbs, who gave us free legal support. But we won that lawsuit with the help of another county in New York in a case called Grease versus Galloway. They went to the Supreme Court at the same time. We filed an amicus brief. And we argued that attempting to tell us who we had to deliver our prayers to, you know, what deity, was the equivalent of censorship. And I said, while I was publicly being televised and the judge was watching, I said, Your Honor, this would be the equivalent of me telling you you can sing any song you want as long as you don't use these three notes, the three dirty words being, in their minds, Jesus, Christ, or Savior. You couldn't say, those are the only three words, by the way, you couldn't say. Did you know that? Legislative prayer, the only three words we weren't allowed to say under the prior Supreme Court decisions was Jesus, Christ, and Savior. Isn't that interesting? You could say Allah, you could say Adonai, you could say Lord of Lord, Lord of Hosts, whatever, God, but you couldn't say Christ, Jesus, or it's ridiculous. So ultimately, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Grease versus Galloway, which went in favor of us. The judge dropped the restraining order. My fellow Commissioner, Robin Frazier, was extremely brave. She said, I will not be censored from praying. If they want to put me in jail, they can put me in jail. And we won. But now we have a new problem with this, because you see, after the Supreme Court ruled in our favor, in Grease versus Galloway's favor, which spilled over to us, the Fourth Circuit started their mischief again, and they ruled, well, that Supreme Court decision didn't really mean that a commissioner could pray in the name of Jesus or Christ or Savior. What it meant is he could get a third party to come in, like a pastor or a priest, which is not what the Supreme Court said. So our counsel came to us and said, you need to go back up to the Supreme Court, Commissioner. They came to me, you got to go back to the Supreme Court, but of course I'm not in office anymore, so I can't. Because the new Supreme Court is more disposed in favor of legislative prayer than the prior Supreme Court. You're definitely going to win if you go there, but you're going to have to continue to fight this. So I went to several members of the new Board of Commissioners, all 5 Republicans, so they say, and not one of them has any appetite to fight this. So we're going to surrender, 5 Republicans are going to surrender a legislative prayer lawsuit that we had won after 50 years and allow it to be reversed, only in the Fourth Circuit, which is Maryland, Virginia, Tennessee, whatever. And so all through the rest of the country, the Supreme Court decision will stand that there can be legislative prayer and an elected official can pray in the name of Christ our Savior, but not in Maryland when this is all done. It's being surrendered by 5 commissioners. And by the way, just so you know what our party does to what we do to our own, the rhinos in the party hated Commissioner Robin Frazier, the Christian conservative, and one of the lawyers for the establishment wrote an article in the newspaper, and he said that Commissioner Frazier reportedly had cost the county hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees fighting this lawsuit. But I know that he knew that was false. I knew he knew that was false because I knew that he knew one of my other fellow commissioners, and all of our legal fees were donated for free. The total legal fees to defend that lawsuit over 2 years were 0. Yet a Republican lawyer attacked a Republican official and candidate running for re-election by asking a rhetorical question. He stopped short of a lie. He says she was reportedly had cost the county $200,000. See the wording he used? Yeah. Creating the impression that she did, but it was a lie. Well, that destroyed her. She got knocked out of office in similar ways to Michael Peruka. This is what our own party's doing to us. But I can tell you all something. There may be some libertarians. There may be some constitutionalists. Most of you are probably Christians, probably not libertarians. But you got to come back to the Republican Party. You got to start voting in our primaries. If you don't vote in our primaries, then the most liberal, worthless people with R's next to their name will become our representatives. And in most county elections across the country, it is not the general election that determines who's going to take office. It is the primary. It is a foregone conclusion in 2,000 of the 3,000 counties that there will be a Republican elected to the senior management government positions of the county. If the Democrats sign on as Republicans so they can influence, and the constitutionalists and the conservatives flee the party because they're fed up, who determines who our Republican candidates are going to be? The left. That's what's happening across the country. If any of you are not registered Republicans, come back to the party and support the most conservative constitutional candidates. There are plenty of us still, but we're getting beaten. I've never been beaten, praise the Lord, but other people have been beaten that shouldn't have been beaten. So that's it. That's the prayer lawsuit. Ron asked me to tell a story. This is controversial. I'm probably going to regret telling it, but it's really kind of funny. And I'm going to tell it. I'm going to try to homogenize it as best I can. There's an organization that trains the next generation of leaders, whether it's Frederick County, Carroll County, they call it Leadership Frederick, Leadership Carroll. People just like you, they want to become the next generation of senior community leaders, Chamber of Commerce, commissioners, Planning Commission, and we train them on how the county works. So as a commissioner, I was invited to speak at one of the classes. This is a great story. So there were two women who were minorities. I want to be respectful here. They were minorities, and they were very active with the school system's multicultural committee. So they stood up, and I know they were targeting me, and they said, "Commissioner, we want to know what you're going to do to increase diversity in our communities." I stood up and I said, "Well, you're not going to like my answer. The answer is nothing. It's not my job. I have no constitutional authority to socially re-engineer communities. If you can show me somewhere in the United States or Maryland Constitution where it says thou shalt socially re-engineer communities so they look the way you want them to look as a government official, you show me that, and I'll rethink my position." And I said, "But I have a question for you, young lady. I want to know why. Why should I?" She says, "Because it's the right thing to do." And I said to her, "Says who, you or me?" She says, "Says the majority, because we're a democracy." I said, "Well, first off," I said, "we are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic, and the majority has no authority to take away the rights of the minority." But this is what I did that I think should be a model for other public officials. And forgive me, Lord, I'm not trying to exalt myself. I'm really not. I'm just trying to explain how you fight back, because I think we need to stop being politically correct. I said to her, "I resent your question. I consider your question inherently racist.
Yes.
I want to know why you didn't ask me what I'm going to do to bring people into our communities who are hardworking, productive, responsible, moral, who will contribute to the community, who are compassionate." All these qualitative terms that know no boundaries of race, religion, or culture. Why don't you ask me the qualitative components? Why I'm going to bring people that kind of make that conform with these qualitative components? Instead, you asked the question in a context that was clearly oriented only towards a person's superficial exterior opinion. And I want to know why, because I think your question was nothing more than veiled racism, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. I want to know why. No answer.
No answer?
No answer. You see, we have to stop capitulating to this. We have to stop being afraid. Republicans have to stop being afraid of fighting back with this politically correct gobbledygook that it's pretty from afar, but when you look at the real logic behind it, it's far from pretty when you get up close to it.
Yep.
Okay? Now I want to make it clear. We should never discriminate against anyone with respect to equal housing or anything like that. And I will defend the rights of any minority full extent I can under the United States Constitution. But I am not required to invoke reverse discrimination, and I will not. And I'm not going to pander to a question which is clearly just a veiled form of reverse racism. We need to start fighting back against this politically correct gobbledygook. Otherwise, the more we pander to it, the more it legitimizes it, and it becomes a basis for policy making. Okay, made my point. So, of course, after I sat down, my other four commissioners all stood up and proceeded to apologize for my...
See, that's the problem.
That's the problem. That's exactly the
That's what
problem.
I'm sick of people
But
apologizing.
I got to tell you, when I delivered that, there was maybe 40 people in the room, and I'm looking at the people in the back of the room, and quite a few of them are going like this to me. We don't want it anymore. I said to my wife, I said, the minority communities in America need to stop belittling us, the society we built, our founding fathers. I can't belittle your parents and expect you to show respect for my parents, okay? These people have the right to be respected, and certainly many of them have some very difficult historical baggage that they inherited, and they deserve compassion. But don't think that gives you a right to attack Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, call them all racist, and therefore the Constitution is... Do you know, by the way, that John Adams said he would never own a slave? Do you know that they're teaching our kids in schools? I'm going to go to the schools. That Thomas Jefferson was nothing more than a racist slavery. And on panel 3 of the F. Jefferson Memorial, you know what Thomas Jefferson wrote? Nothing is more certainly written in the Book of Faith than that these people are to be free. Hardly sounds like a racist. Benjamin Franklin, anybody know what position he held in Pennsylvania? He was president of the Pennsylvania Society for the Abolition for the Society to Abolish Slavery. And yet our schools teach our children that these people were all racist that wrote the Constitution. Therefore, the Constitution is not worthy of respect because our founding fathers were not worthy of respect. It's simply false. Very troubling. I don't even know where I was going with this. It's very troubling. We have to start demanding that they respect our heritage. And we, of course, have a responsibility to respect them and their heritage. But it works both ways. Don't think that you have a right to throw darts at men and women that we're proud of. I'm proud of being an American citizen. I'm proud of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Rush, Thomas Jefferson. I'm proud of these guys, George Washington. And I'll tell you something else I want you to know. I've mentioned this before. The biggest lie being told in our schools is that we are not a Christian nation. If you get in your Google engines, when you get tomorrow, you look up the Congressional Supplication Proclamations. They were written, there was 15 of them written circa 1774 to 1785. Supplication proclamations. Every one of these proclamations was signed by Congress, it was written, and every one of them made references to God, the great Redeemer. Who's the great Redeemer? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Okay? The Congress had resolutions to import 20,000 Bibles to circumvent the English blockade. One of the supplication proclamations even goes so far as to state that our schools and institutions should spread the light of Christian knowledge to the remotest corners of the world. How dare these liberal educrats tell our children, our public schools, that we were not a Christian nation? Now, you may not like it, they might want to change it, but they do not have a right to change history. And every single state constitution, even today, has a God requirement. It says in order to hold an office of trust, what's an office of trust? An elected position. Every single person who holds an office of trust must profess their belief in the existence of God. Still in the Maryland Constitution today, Articles 35 and 36 or 34 and 35. Okay? And when you go back to the earlier versions of the state constitutions from the 17 and 1800s, they use stronger language. They use language that either said every person, as a condition of holding an office of trust, must either A, they would say profess their belief in Jesus Christ, or B, they would say profess their belief in the Old and New Testaments. Don't tell our children that we were not a Christian country. We were. Okay? And they are committing the most egregious sin. It is a sin of deception through omission with our children. Deception through omission. And what does the Bible say about those who will mislead our children? They will go to the bottom with what around their necks? A millstone around their necks. And we got to start fighting back on this. I recommend parents start looking up these supplication proclamations and go to your Board of Education meeting, go to your county council, your commission meeting, and read it. Read Articles 34 and 35 to them, the Maryland Constitution. God requirements. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so let's go back. I'm going to wrap up. We have about 15 minutes. I have maybe 5 more minutes of slides, almost done. So, what does effective resistance look like? Well, you need to know that the establishment Republicans, they hate those of us that are the constitutions that are fighting. They don't like this. I've asked my wife, why do they hate us so much? And she says, I don't know whether they're jealous, my wife says, or whether it makes them look feckless, I'm not sure. But it's troubling that they don't support us. Most of these epic issues you've seen on video, most of the Republicans that I work with were on the fly with their tails between their legs, unfortunately. A few were with me, though. Let's talk about the GOP. How could the GOP do its job? The GOP platform is great. It talks about the fact our rights are from God. The purpose of government is to secure our rights of life, liberty, and property. It talks about defending the Second Amendment, defense of Title IX. Title IX is the right of is to prevent gender discrimination within our schools, and it goes on to say that they object to the perversion of it by trying to include all kinds of gender identities, which allow boys and girls rooms and disrespect the privacy of boys and girls. They're a strong advocate for school choice. How many Republicans in this state are advocates for school choice? Here's a fact. Commissioner Robin Fraser and I created the state's first education choice program. If you took your kids out of public schools and homeschooled them or parochial schooled them, you got a $1,000 tax credit. It was dismantled 2 years later by who? 4 Republicans, in quotes, that outvoted me. Why? Because the teachers union hated it. Why? Because every head that leaves the public school system takes dollars with them. It's all about the money. We are being betrayed by Republicans, but not our party per se. We're being betrayed by Republicans that refuse to uphold the tenets of the RNC platform, which is a good one. It's a good platform. Read it. You can get it online. Okay, and one of the things you should be doing is demanding that your central committee and every official that runs for office should take an oath, an affidavit to uphold the principles of the RNC. Because if every Republican in this state and this country upheld the principles of the RNC, we wouldn't be where we are today. You should not be allowed to call yourself a Republican if you're not going to govern according to the principles of our party. Now, there could be some room for some deviation, but when you're a Republican like some of the kinds I'm dealing with who are pushing to raise taxes, eliminate school choice, ban straws, that's not a Republican.
It's a rhino.
I don't even know if it's a rhino. I think it's a Democrat, a liberal, period.
It's a Republican name on it.
Republican, I know, you're right. RNC platform, here's one on snowflakes. Here's what it says in the RNC platform. This is great stuff. Universities should be places of learning and the exchange of ideas, not zones of intellectual intolerance or safe zones. That's in our RNC platform. Let's hear it. Yay! There's nothing wrong with our party platform. The problem is the people that are pretending to be Republicans. Yes, Ron?
Can you tell the quick story about your experience going into the classroom up at the college and the...
Okay, this is a good time. So this is a funny story. So I'm not going to mention the school or the teacher, but I get a call from a college professor. This is funny. This is really funny as hell, I got to tell you. Commissioner, we'd like to invite you as our special guest. I'm having a course on how to have conversations with difficult people. So you can guess what my role was. I was going to be the dog that got kicked, but being a person of conviction, I said I have a responsibility to my party and to my citizens to go and defend our position. So I go into the classroom. I'm sitting here, and there's a horseshoe with about 20 college kids around me. So the topic was this. I had written an article that had to do with whether the gay movement in America was looking for equal rights or whether they're really pursuing super rights. And the premise I took was the bakery incident where the Christian couple refused to bake the cake for the gay couple. They said it violated their sensibilities. I said, now, let's invert the situation. This is what I said in the article. Imagine the gay couple owned the bakery, and the conservative couple wanted it for their gun rights rally, the cake, and the gay couple said, we're not going to do it because it violates their sensibilities. I said, would the conservative couple have a cause of action? The answer is no. The cake stops here. Why? Because they don't have super rights. And I went on to argue that, in fact, what the left is really pursuing in this country is super rights, not equal rights. So that was the nature of the article. Nothing too radical about that. So go back to the classroom. She says, I want every student to take just 20 or 30 seconds and tell the commissioner how you felt about their article. I'm going to try to do this without inserting any extra drama, but it went something like this. Young woman number 1 gets up. I just never read anything like this. I just can't believe this. I'm just speechless. She sits down. Next young woman stands up. There are mostly women in the class. I'm just so offended by this. I can't believe they would allow something like this to be published. I mean, I can't believe we're even having this discussion in the classroom. Third woman stands up. 21-year-old woman, all-American girl. I don't feel safe in this room anymore. Since the commissioner, I don't feel that this classroom is a safe zone anymore, not commissioners in here. And then that theme became the theme for a couple of other people, students. So they got around the room. You're going to love this. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just thinking, how am I going to respond to this? And they finally get around the room, and the professor says, well, Commissioner, any comment? I said, oh, yeah, I got plenty of comments. I said, here's my comment to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. This class is supposed to be how to have discussions with difficult people. Well, I want to remind all of you that one day from now, 10 or 20 years, you could all get hired by the White House or Department of State and be sent over to North Korea to negotiate with a maniac who wants to fire nuclear missiles at us and kill all of your family members. And I want to assure you of something. When you get to North Korea to negotiate, there will be no safe zones. So I have a piece of advice for all of you. Get over it. That's how it happened. But this is what we're dealing with. But here's the problem. The problem is most Republicans will not do that. I want to know why. They're afraid of how they're going to be depicted in the media. I just don't care. Psst. My injection of apathy. I don't care if the liberal media attacks me. In fact, I was on the Sean Casey show a few years ago, and he says, well, Commissioner, the newspaper's making a piñata out of you, calling you a right-wing extremist. How do you respond to that? I said, well, Sean, I'll be honest with you. I said, you got to look at what they define as a right-wing extremist. In their world of liberalism, anyone that believes in the Bible or the Constitution is a right-wing extremist, so I consider it good branding. That was the discussion. Okay, so let's continue on here. Any other comments before I move on? We're getting close to wrapping up. So what's the problem we have in our party and our country today? Well, most Republicans are not adhering to the platform of the RNC, which is a great platform. These Republicans that run for office tend to be expedient, pragmatic. They're bought and paid for by voting blocs, like the teachers union that promised to put them into office if they'll pander to them. They pick and choose what they want to enforce. They don't want to talk about God for fear of losing young people who are cynical, and they do this because we let them. It's the people, not the platform, that are the problem. It's the media. The problem is the people that are running for office that are betraying our platform. You should demand they sign an affidavit agreeing to uphold the RNC platform. It's patriots that leave the party and allow the rhinos to choose who wins Republican primaries. I'll tell you a funny story. It's the media, again. About the Carroll County Times, and a question I asked them one year, in 2014, the editor announced that for the first time they were going to make endorsements in the Republican primary. I said, well, big deal. So I'm sitting in the room with about 30 other candidates, and I raised my hand. Jim, yes, Commissioner, I have a question for you. You indicate you're going to make endorsements for the Republican primaries for Commissioner. I have one question for you. He says, what, Commissioner? I said, are you going to use Democratic criteria or Republican criteria for determining who you're going to endorse? The Republican Party. That's right. It's ridiculous. But I knew what they were going to do. And his answer was, well, Commissioner, we're going to use our own criteria. And I said, well, so in other words, you're going to use Democratic criteria for determining who you endorse in the Republican primary. See what's going wrong here? So some solutions, central committees and activists across the country need to start holding fake Republicans accountable when they betray our party and expose them in the media. If a candidate won't take a pledge to uphold the RNC platform, then expose them. Write a 200, 300-word letter to the editor. We've got to demand that the media use our Republican platform as the measuring stick for evaluating Republican behavior. And we must vote for candidates who have not been emasculated. We have to say, I once stood up in the Institute on the Constitution when I was at the church, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you what we're missing in America, John Wayne. Okay, we got to not vote for men or women that have been emasculated. We need people who are going to stand up for their convictions. And as John Wayne said, bravery is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. And ladies and gentlemen, that is my presentation. I'll be happy to have a few minutes of discussion before we wrap up. Yes?
Two questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Two questions. One question is, when did this platform come in effect? Was that a Trump platform?
No, this platform actually was the most recent update, I believe, was 2016, if I recall. And I think what I was reading was a 2016 platform. So
Okay,
about the time.
and is it documented?
It's online.
It's on the website?
Just go on Google and look up 2016 RNC platform. You can download and read the entire document. It's a great document. I love the RNC platform, but I hate what fake Republicans are doing to my party.
I happen to be a big follower of Family Research Council, and I happen to know that Tony Perkins and those people had a lot to do with the Republican platform. You ought to read it.
Well,
Yeah.
it shows. It
Yeah.
shows because it's a darn good platform.
Yeah.
Anything
Did you-
else?
One more question? Okay.
One more question, then we'll call it a wrap. Okay?
Well, let's give Richard a round of applause. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.